Don't be feeling blue, no, no. Shine your light all around, like I know you can do, baby. Yeah, I know you can do. Now some people.
Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Today, my guests are fellow researchers and colleagues Melinda, Victoria, and Wendy. The ladies join me for a roundtable discussion to analyze the 9 after 909 edition of the Memoirs of Billy Shears, a book that many consider to be a must-read for anyone researching and looking into the Paul is dead or McCartney conspiracy. The conversation was wide-ranging and insightful as we discussed the story of the man who has been playing the part of Paul McCartney for over 50 years. So sit back, take a listen, and enjoy, because a splendid time is guaranteed for all. Well, folks, we have a great show today, and as promised, this show is going to bring together friends of mine who are researchers and colleagues that have studied the Paul is dead conspiracy or the McCartney conspiracy, and all of us have dove into the Memoirs of Billy Shears, and today we're going to focus on the Blue Book, which is the second edition, which came out September 9th of last year. That's when it was pre-ordered. So with me for this show is Melinda, Victoria, and Wendy, and we have been conversing back and forth over the last 2 or 3 years, and as I have mentioned on a number of shows, I do a lot of my own research, but there's a lot of really smart people out there that are also doing research. And with that, I would like to thank Melinda, Victoria, and Wendy for joining the show. So the first question I have, ladies, is the book itself, The Memoirs of Billy Shears. And we're going to focus on the blue cover. Is Billy involved in this book, or is the book a figment of Tom Harriot's imagination? And so we'll start with Melinda first. Melinda, what are your thoughts?
There's way too many inside perspectives in the life of the Beatles and the music industry. Tom would have to have been a creative genius to have put this thing together strictly by research. So, I mean, I just really don't see how it could be anything other than Bill being heavily involved in this. Just the lyric content of explaining how songs connect to each other, what lyrics mean, is absolutely mind-blowing. It will make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. A lot of times when you experience truth and it resonates with you, you have experiences like that where, you know, you get goosebumps and things become crystal clear. And reading that book was definitely an experience like that for me.
Okay. Victoria, what are your thoughts?
Billy is definitely involved. I don't think Tom Harriot could have done it, although I think he's a smart guy. I don't think that he could have, I don't think he could have done this if he were 100% accurate psychic. He couldn't have come up with some of this stuff. And there's also song lyrics in the back. He would have had to have been a lyricist. And I don't think that's possible. There's just a lot of insider information. He would have to be talking to either William or somebody extremely close to William. There's mentions of obscure songs in there, you know, things that most people wouldn't have even thought about. And I would think that there would be a lot of copyright infringement. Just for an example, the movie Yesterday paid out about 40% of their budget just to copyrights for the songs. This book likely did not have the same opportunities to pay big money, and money would have had to have been exchanged or permissions.
So you're saying the financing of the book alone to include the songs would have been an astronomical amount of money?
Yes, for a company like the Pepper Press, was it?
Yeah, right.
It's not like it's Doubleday or someone. That's my opinion on that. So
now you mentioned the lyrics in the back of the book. Just so for folks who haven't read the book, what Victoria is speaking about there is there's a song contest. And in the back of the book, there are lyrics that Billy has supplied. And if you write a song and you incorporate those lyrics, you can submit it. And at some point, Billy claims that he's going to release a CD with the winners of the song contest with, their versions of the songs with those lyrics on that CD or album. So that's what Victoria was referring to. Wendy, how about yourself? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I think you'd have to be extremely close to the Beatles or Billy himself to be able to come up with this kind of detail. And, too much continual knowledge of the time and ongoing involvement. It has to be Billy. And also, when people write a book, they do it for money and, for the subject. But this book isn't advertised at all. And so it has to be someone that doesn't really need the money for the book to be coming out, if that makes sense. Because of the way it's advertised. So it just couldn't be anyone else.
Yeah, in fact, I think Billy refers to it as an underground book, and it was self-published, right, through CreateSpace, I believe it was, right? So you're right. So it is very limited exposure, and it's almost as if what he's saying is, if you really want to know and you're really seeking, you'll find it.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about why Billy is releasing this information and why he's disclosing. So, Melinda, what are your thoughts? Why is he doing this?
I would venture to guess that, for one, he is closing in on his crossing over date and to explain how it all went down, and also some type of validation. But I think more than anything else is the introduction where he discusses to his children that he wrote that as a way of understanding that they've had to live a lie. It's one thing for him and Linda to have made that choice, but, they pretty much hoisted that upon their children with no choice for them to make as to whether or not they wanted to live this lie. So I think, clearing the air is one thing, but I think more than anything, it's almost an apology to his kids.
Interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but that's very interesting. Victoria, how about yourself?
Because living a lie is difficult. It's, and he's been doing it a very long time. And I think that he has made efforts in the past, whether it was an obligation or just something he wanted with these clues and these little truths that he left along the way, the album covers and the whatever. Because honestly, on those clues, for normal people, it would be like the joke that got old. It was fun the first couple, but then after that, he just kept doing it. And so obviously he was trying to communicate, and obviously people weren't getting it. And he wants to tell them about himself. He is getting towards the end of the runway, and he wants to finish up his unfinished business.
And people don't know who he is, right? I mean, that's the point. All of these songs, and who knows who Billy Shears or Billy Shepherd or Billy Campbell, whatever surname you want to use, nobody knows who he is. Everybody thinks he's a guy by the name of Paul McCartney, right?
Right. Even at the end of the song index, it does state that as Billy ends his entire life, there is a sentence in there that says that. So this is all prepping. This is all prepping us to get ready for the next step.
Okay. Wendy?
I think when, the replacement happened, it was probably exciting, and the thought of money and fame was, on his mind, and being in charge of, the best group in the world, the Beatles, was sort of sounded amazing. But I think after 53 years, the majority of fans don't know who he is, and I think it may be taking its toll. And I think also when you get older, you have periods of reflection, and you sometimes sit and analyse your life's path. And I think, like everyone else has said, he's getting near the end of his runway, and he basically wants people to know who he is. And I think more than that, I think he wants people to like him.
Yeah, he mentions that in the book. He wants us to get to know him, and One of the things I guess we could talk about now a little bit is in the Red Book, for those of us that read the Red Book, the tone that Billy took in the narrative was very arrogant to a lot of people. I felt that way when I read the Red Book. And then I noticed with the Blue Book that the arrogance was softened and he came across a little more personable. What are your thoughts on that? Wendy, I'll start with you since I kind of tagged on to your response there.
I haven't read the Red Book. I've only read comments about it. But most people have said, how arrogant and self-centered he sounded in the Red Book. He definitely seems a nicer person, a more balanced person in the Blue Book. And the Blue Book contains more detailed disclosure and more verifiable facts. And he doesn't sound so egotistical as everybody said that he did in the Red Book. And also there's more emphasis placed on Crowley in the Blue Book. And I think it's all information for us to find out everything else for ourselves.
Melinda, you read the Red Book, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what is your take? Was Billy more arrogant in the Red Book versus the Blue Book?
Oh, absolutely. But, I mean, you can equate that with, 10 years between both books?
Yeah.
10 years can make a big difference in your maturity level and your mellow attitude. So, you gotta factor that into it, is that he's just growing older and a little more softer around the edges.
Yeah, because it was 9 years between the books, the Red Book and the Blue Book.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, think about our own, how we are looking back at what you were like 10 years ago, whatever, as opposed to now. You're a lot more patient. You're up, so, and some of it could be just a reaction to the Red Book.
Yes.
That he got so much negative feedback from the attitude that he decided to tone it down.
Victoria, how about yourself? Did you read the Red Book?
I read the Red Book and I read the Blue Book. I felt like in spots the Red Book was almost hard to read due to the arrogance. I mean, I might skip a page or two here or there because I got tired of hearing it. Nonetheless, when the new book came out, I was excited. I wanted to read it. I went and got it. And I tell people that it's like some of the layers of his glass onion have been peeled back. It's revealing. He's personable. It's somebody that you would like to meet and have a chat with. It's definitely full of more emotion.
Now, what about the discussion about Tom himself? Now, we've all heard that people saying that Tom is not a real person and all this, and I believe all of us on this call know that Tom is indeed real. So what's your take on Tom's role with this? Just your opinion. How do you think that he got involved in doing this book with Billy? Melinda, is Tom real?
Oh, Tom's real.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Facebook friends with him. And he seems like a genuinely nice guy. He's never been anything but really kind and positive.
Yes.
I was just reading it for the third time, the blue one, and the part where he said, think of all historical facts with the Beatles as fiction and all the things that are in this book as fact.
Right.
Tom obviously had quite a reputation for what he does for him to be enlisted to do this book in the first place.
Victoria, what are your thoughts regarding Tom's role with the book?
Well, if you read the sleeve of the book, it says Tom is a code breaker. And that kind of made me think about taking us back to the Red Book and maybe a little before that. The whole Da Vinci Code thing was big there for a while, the Bible codes and encoding and the whole bunch of that, which isn't something that is a hot topic now, but at that time it was. And I think that Tom and Bill we kind of share an esoteric view about codes and encoding. I'm not saying that Tom necessarily believes the same things that Bill does as far as spirituality or anything else like that. I just mean that, maybe it's like a hobby type of a thing for Tom to be this encoder, and Bill happens to like codes. So I think there's more to their friendship than emails and telephone calls because he knows so much that would almost be expected that they've at least met. I would think if I were trusting, I wouldn't trust a stranger with all that insider information unless I'd met them and felt good about it.
Right, right. Wendy?
I think Tom obviously is real. I think he's probably a Freemason as well. And I think he comes across as a completely trustworthy individual. And he obviously has Billy's confidence to be able to keep all this information. And he just comes across as a decent person when I've seen comments and everything else about Tom. And I think he's just trusted. He's a trusted individual, which I think in this psychological operation, you need to have somebody that you know is going to fulfill their part of the deal.
That's a very good point. Basically, some even keel element to this whole thing, because it is a very controversial topic. We all know this. And we all know that even within the Paul is Dead community itself, I mean, people don't agree. And it can get, quite nasty sometimes. So I think this calming effect, or, this even keelness that Tom brings is very helpful. So that's a very good point, Wendy. I did ask Tom about the encoding and how it is that he came upon these skills. And it was in an email exchange that we had. It's going back several months ago, maybe even a year ago or so. And he said to me that he had received the training a long time ago, and that when he was being trained to do this, that at the time he had no idea why he was taking this training or why he was involved in it. And so it's one of those things, if you read into it, where he was being essentially tapped, identified early on as somebody who had a certain skill set that was going to be very beneficial down the line. Now, whether it meant it had to do with the memoirs of Billy Shears or something else, we don't know that. But sounds to me like, lack of a better term, he was groomed. That's what it sounded like to me. So what are your thoughts on that, Melinda?
Well, over the history, haven't Masons and secret societies kind of encoded and communicated with each other, even written in the Bible and, William Shakespeare and all that type of stuff. So, he just excelled at what he did. Just like grooming Bill. I mean, he showed a talent for music at a very young age, according to Memoirs. And I'm sure Tom showed a talent for what he did at a very young age. And so they just sort of gelled. They both had built reputations, and it only made sense to put the two of them together.
Yeah. So another story that I can tell here, and it was through an email exchange I had with Tom, and I had a question about, and this is during when the Red Book was out. The Blue Book was not released yet, and it had to do with the whole Phil Ackrell piece of the book. And I had a question about the Ackrell narrative. And so I emailed Tom, and he wrote me back, and he said, Mike, I have to go through the boxes that I have and let me see what information, additional details that I have that I can look to incorporate into the book to clarify certain aspects of the Ackrell story. So that was it. That was basically the exchange. But what I found interesting was that he said that he had to go back to the boxes, which says to me that a shipment of boxes came, and I'm sure those files were very orderly, chronological, and had Billy's life detailed to the nth degree. So it was up to Tom to go through all that information and sort through it and then put the book together.
Wow.
That's my take on it, right? I don't know this for sure. I'm just saying that I'm kind of extrapolating here based upon that one email that we had. Let's go down this path a little bit now, because this is something that those of us that have read the memoirs of Billy Shears, and we talk about it and we discuss it, that we bump up against a lot, that people question the truthfulness of the book, because the book is categorized as historical fiction. And the reason for that, as we all know, is because, and it is explained in the book, the reason why it is categorized as historical fiction is because Billy and Tom, but we'll focus on Billy because he's the the protagonist, he had to sign non-disclosures and confidentiality agreements in order to be in the role of Paul McCartney. So in order to be able to not breach those contracts, there has to be a fictional element flowing through the book. Now, that being said, the question becomes, do the fictional elements of the book outweigh the truthfulness of the book? So that's why I will always say the book is truthful. And if you go into the book realizing that the reason why there has to be fictional aspects is because they have to protect the agreements that have been signed, and you can rise above getting hunkered down with, well, you know, this little piece here is, I believe, to be fictional, so I'm just going to disregard the entire book. I think that's very foolish, my personal opinion, because of all the detail that is in the book that only an insider would know. We mentioned before about the song lyrics and how the song lyrics tie together, and the true meanings of many of those lyrics, because all of the songs after Billy joined the band were all Paul is Dead songs, so they had Paul is Dead clues in them, some more than others, but this is what Billy tells us in Memoirs. Victoria, how about yourself? The truthfulness of the book, how do you explain it to people if and when you're asked?
Well, I have a tough time getting other people to read the book. They've already made up their minds, but I think that throughout the book there are small untruths here and there to help that, but nothing that matters, nothing that's a big deal. I think it's generally mostly truthful. I think that people struggle with the occult aspect, but who's going to go in there and say, oh, I'm a follower of Crowley? I mean, who's going to go in there and say that if there's not something to it? And by the way, everything that I can find in there, researchable, that I've looked up is true.
Yes, you hit on a very key point. Those aspects of the book where he explains the occult and other scenarios that he takes us through, when you research it, and we'll get into it a little later with the Stanchel bit, when you research it, you're left with proving it or validating that it's true. Because when I go through this, and I know you ladies do the same thing, I go into it and I'm looking to either validate it or debunk it based upon my own independent research. So I use the book as a foundation. It's a starting point, the stepping stone. And then I branch out to see if what's being told in the book is accurate, if it's truthful. And what I have found is that the big stuff in the book is indeed factual, coming from my perspective in my research. So is that where you're going with it too, Victoria?
Yes, I have, looked up the stuff I'm interested in and some of the other stuff that I really wasn't. I just wanted to see what I could find, and especially with the occultic aspects, I found everything to be true, everything that is researchable, everything. And I'm not saying that Tom Harriet is made all this up about, well, there would have been lawsuits.
Yes. If
Bill wasn't okay with such being said about him, then there would have just been lawsuits all over the place.
Wendy, how about yourself?
Well, I read it on face value, and I think it's as truthful as it possibly can be. And I know there are themes running through the book from start to finish, especially there's a long-running joke between John and Billy regarding 666 the Beast. And they laugh about that, so that tells you that it's sort of not true. And I think that particular part was Tom Harriet's idea. Yes, it was. And so I agree with you. It's like a foundation course in college. It's there to create your interest and give you a certain amount of information for you then to go out and find the rest of the information yourself. In chapter 65, it says everything to prove identity is true and verifiable, and facts about not being Paul are easily documented. And it does state that chapter 35 is fiction, and Tom Harriet took liberties with dialogue and other elements, but on the whole, I think it's a truthful book. I think it's as truthful as it possibly can be without getting into trouble over it.
And chapter 65, by the way, is a very important chapter, and especially if you break down the acrostical code. So maybe what I'll do is I'll insert that into the show so people can see what the acrostical code looks like for chapter 65. As you all know, I put a video out giving my perspective on what I thought were the fictional components of the book. Now, I will say this, and I haven't mentioned this before, but I did run my premise by Tom, and Tom got back to me and said, you're on the right track. My premise was, and I'll put the link down in the description box below for the video, that the fictional parts of Memoirs has to do with a psychological play or psychological thread in the book. And they knew, when I say they, I mean Billy and Tom knew, that because of people's belief systems, they are apt to believe something if it resonates with them or it's something that they believe in, and they are apt to disbelieve something if it doesn't fit into or gel with their worldview. The example I can use is the occult. Many people reject the occult. They just do not believe that the occult exists, that it's played up, it's over-exaggerated. So when the book talks about the occult aspects, there are a lot of people that will just reject that out of hand. As soon as you reject it, what you're saying is that part of the book is fiction. If you think that Aleister Crowley was unimportant or that he was a carnival barker, then whenever Billy talks about Crowley and you don't believe in Crowley, you're going to say, well, that part is fiction. And we can go right down the line. So if you don't believe that he played a version of Vivian Stanshall, then when you read the Stanshall pieces in the book, you're going to say that's fiction. I figured this out because, as I was reading it, I thought to myself, because I've been in the research conspiracy business for a long time, and as I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, this is like the motherlode of conspiracy in this book as far as the occult goes, the esoteric, mysticism, all of that stuff, Crowley, magic, the Illuminati. And I thought, this book is not for the average person, because for the average person to pick this up and not have any understanding of Freemasonry, secret societies, the Illuminati, Crowley, or any of that stuff is really going to struggle to get their heads wrapped around this book. And in fact, many people might just put the book down and say, what a bunch of nonsense. So I thought to myself, what if that was the major approach to defining the fiction? Because my thinking was, let's just say, hypothetically, you're going to take Billy to court, and you're going to take the Memoirs of Billy Shears into court with you. How do you prove that the occult is important or that the occult is real? How do you prove numerology? How do you prove Aleister Crowley and his influence? And the answer to that is you cannot. So therefore, those aspects of the book, they could be deemed fiction. Even if you presented it to a jury and you talk to the jury about a lot of what's in this book, I mean, their heads are going to swim. They're going to go, that just can't be. That can't be real. And so when that happens, what do you have? So the fictional pieces of the book, a majority of the fiction in the book has to do with playing on people's belief systems and their worldviews. People believe things, they accept it. People don't believe things, they reject it. So I know I was a little long-winded there. So let's just go around the table a little bit and see if I'm out to lunch here. So Wendy, what do you think about that?
So in that case, possibly all the book could be truthful, but because of people's personal ideologies, it can never be called the absolute truth because nobody will believe 100% of it.
That's right. Yep, that's exactly my premise, that it actually brings the reader in and the reader makes it fiction.
Yes, absolutely.
If that's what they did, and again, like I said, I did run my premise by Tom, and he said I was on the right track. It's actually brilliant.
It is.
When you think about it.
Absolutely brilliant, because it could never be called the truth because not everybody would believe it. And that's it.
Melinda, what are your thoughts?
Reading the Red Memoirs years ago, there were a couple of nights that I slept with the light on just because it scared me. And then it became a springboard of understanding how the world works. I mean, he plays it out right there. He shows you right there. When you finally understand, I mean, with the numbers and the signs and how the numbers are relating to even media stories and stuff like that. when I talk to people about memoirs, I go, if you want to know why you haven't made it big in the music industry, you might want to read this book, because it will give you an understanding of how why you didn't make it.
Right.
It's all obviously controlled. And once you see it, you can't never go back.
Victoria, how about yourself?
There seems to be a theme out there of what ifs. The Yesterday movie, for example. What if this? What if that? And I think people are accustomed to saying what if this, what if that, and they're kind of used to some sort of fiction being built in around the Beatles. It's been conditioned over the years.
All right, so let's switch gears a little bit here, and let's talk about something that's another controversial piece of the book, where Billy comes out and tells us point blank that the Beatles were a Tavistock project right from the beginning, that the Beatles were never organic. Now, some people will say to me, Mike, that's not true. They were organic when they were 5 years old, you know. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the starting point of which the Beatles started to come together as a group, and that progression. That's what we're talking about. I'm not talking about when they were little children. So, Melinda, what's your take on that aspect of Memoirs where Billy is telling us the Beatles were a Tavistock project right from the very beginning?
Well, I do remember reading a couple of days ago where he mentioned that the elites had their eyes on Paul from the beginning, and that if he had gone to a different band, they still would have, like, he was a marked man.
Yeah.
If you go back to what Richard Balducci talks about his birth date, he mentions he picked a bad time to be born. That's a great way to put it. I mean, the more you think about this, the more you go into it, you realize, you know, poor Paul probably had no concept of what was going on around him. That's just kind of the way I look at it. I mean, he got coaxed and pushed in certain directions, but it was almost like he was born to die in that perspective.
Victoria, what are your thoughts?
Well, do you remember, and I don't know, maybe you haven't seen everything I've seen, but it seems like it came across your channels somehow. Do you remember the radio announcer that went to visit Yoko Ono, and Yoko said, "Oh no, I have to see your astrology chart first." And so he gave her the...
That was the Playboy interview.
Yeah, that's right, the Playboy interview.
Right.
So he gave her the information, and she said, "Oh, yes, well, we can do this." I think that it was something like that. If it wasn't that from the start, now where the start was, I don't know if that was in high school when they had their little group, because I don't even know if you could get high school boys under your thumb that way. Maybe not. But anywhere from where Brian Epstein stepped in forward, definitely not organic. They're the product of a Tavistock think tank. That's where they were conceived. And I kind of wonder if it wasn't astrology charts, as Richard pointed out about Paul's birthday.
Okay, Wendy, what are your thoughts about Tavistock being in it from the very beginning?
Yes, I think they were. I think they were four young lads that were easy to manipulate, and I think they were probably watched. And because four young lads left to their own devices would not have had the impact and sustainability and success without being controlled. I mean, when you're 20, 21, 22, you know, you want to do what you want to do. You're completely narcissistic, and unless you've got some control around you, you know, you're not going to have that work ethic. And I think that my personal feeling is that they were never organic, and right from the start, and they were watched, and you know, to see if they could be made into what they wanted them to be. And so, you know, the myth of the four working class lads that worked hard, got to where they're going, I think is an absolute myth.
I'm with you. You and I agree 100% on that. I believe it to be a myth also, and I've explained to my audience and to folks that speak to me about this and want to know more about it that you have to remember that the same people that created the band are the same people that gave you the backdrop.
Yes.
They're the ones that wrote the narrative. They wrote the magazine articles. They wrote the history. They're the ones that a lot of these websites that are up on the internet today are controlled by the very group, by the controllers, by Tavistock, to ensure that the whole story came together. It wasn't just Tavistock creating a band. They had to create the whole package. They had to package it.
Yes.
And we have pictures of Stuart Sutcliffe going back to when they were back in the days of Hamburg, making Masonic hand signs. So I think what we're all saying is the Beatles, at the very least, from the standpoint of when they signed on a dotted line with EMI, or when Brian Epstein caught up with them, organic was over.
I don't think organic was there from the start.
Yes, I agree with you 100%, Wendy. You and I are on the same page. I believe that they were in the test tube from the very beginning. But let's get Melinda and Victoria to weigh in with whether they agree or not, or with their rebuttal.
Yeah, and the Hamburg thing, I'm not just defending what I said before necessarily, but this could have been something that they knew, that if they're on board with this idealism, that maybe they get to become famous.
Yeah.
But maybe they had, maybe they hadn't been contacted, targeted, worked with already. But definitely, at least by the time Brian Epstein came into the picture, or maybe even a little bit before.
Okay. Melinda, what do you think?
Well, I mean, how much they understood of the occult, who knows? But I think the occult aspect has been on them from the get-go. Even quarryman is another name for what, a mason?
Right.
And that's what, they're in high school at that point. How much their fathers had to do with this is a real questionable aspect, or at least Paul's father. There's just so much to wonder about what was going on as they were little kids. I mean, because even some of the pictures, and gosh, Paul doesn't look anything like his brother.
Mike McCartney.
Yeah. So what's going on with, or McGear? Did he change his name to McGear?
That's his stage name, McGear, yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of go back and forth. It's either maybe right from the beginning, or, trying to pinpoint when exactly the occult took over. It's pretty hard to, they pretty much blend.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the question that we wanted to discuss about the occult. And I had said previously, it was my mistake, that the ritual that Billy says that Paul and John participated in was in 1962. It was actually in 1963. It was October of 1963. Of course, when this was discussed, when I brought it out on my shows, a lot of people just went absolutely nuts, because they in no way could ever believe that Paul McCartney and John Lennon, especially Paul McCartney, could participate in a satanic ritual, what Billy refers to as death for success, right? So Billy tells us in the book that Brian Jones did the same thing, John Bonham, Keith Moon, we can go on and on. We have the 27 Club and so on. So what were your thoughts when you read the book, and in the blue book, because it's not in the red book, when you got to the blue book and you read about the ritual, what were your thoughts? And we'll start with Wendy on this. Wendy, what did you think when you read that?
It does sound unbelievable, but it doesn't surprise me. When you move on from that fact and you realise what goes on in the music industry, it doesn't surprise you. And perhaps at the early age, taking part in that was perhaps exciting, and, they made you feel important and everything. And perhaps, the thought of death was perhaps just a metaphor for success. And only when it actually happened to Paul, I think, did John realise that, no, this is what happens. I think the controllers made it sound exciting to them, and the thought of being immortal and, as you say, death for success. Perhaps death aspect was the metaphor for them. Perhaps they didn't realise exactly what they were getting into.
Yeah, because we do have to keep in mind that in 1963, Paul was 21 years old, so he was a very, very young guy.
Yeah.
Victoria, what do you think about that whole part of the book where he talks about Paul and John entering into that ritual in 63?
What did I get out of it? This is complicated. I think that, yes, that really did happen. Did it surprise me that they disclosed it? Yeah. I think I was surprised at the disclosure. I think they did do that. They certainly have backed up their information on that. However, growing up, at the time I grew up, we had bands that everyone knew was Satan worshipers. And, they looked it and they acted it and they said it and they sang it. And, they were mostly metal bands or whatever. But the Beatles, at least when they were young, they didn't look that way. And, then they kind of went through the counterculture stage. But so I didn't really expect that growing up. I didn't expect in the beginning to be finding these things out about them, although I'd heard whispers all my life that was true. I didn't really believe it until I read this. I think they were young. I think they thought this was just games that, oh, okay, well, sign here and you'll get $1 million or whatever. And they just did it. They just signed up for whatever. They were probably also tired of being hungry and poor.
Yeah, there's no way of knowing what they were thinking or how much they knew about occultism and the ritual and all that when it took place. So it could very well have been one of those things where they engaged in it and they just didn't take it that seriously. Now, Melinda, what are your thoughts about the ritual aspect of the story?
Well, the book would have obviously, that part would not have been able to be received at the time that it went down, but the proof is kind of in the pudding. I mean, he mentions right after that line, because I was reading it this morning, is that he said, everybody has done it that's successful, and there's going to be a death in the band. Somebody's going to die in the band. And I talk to people, go, tell me one band that has not had somebody die in it. Really hard to find one, either whether it's somebody, in the band or a loved one. Oh, you see that a lot with Hollywood and stuff. So it was really hard to take. And just like Victoria said, I think they were really young and they had no idea. It was almost entrapment that they were coaxed into doing this. And if they were victims of mind control, were they really in their right mind when it went down in the first place?
That's a premise that I floated out there. I'm not going to bring it up on this show because it's not in Memoirs, but just to touch on it.
Right.
That I believe it's very possible that Paul and John were in mind control programs from a very early age. And the reason why I say that, folks, is because if you take a look at their family structure, their fathers especially, they're really not there. This is very indicative, if you do any research into mind control, that, they come from families where parents are absentee or they're raised by an aunt or something like that, So that's something that has crossed my mind. I haven't pushed it because it's very difficult to prove, but it is something that I've thought about. Now, also, let's just talk about this a little bit. So when people don't want to embrace or believe the whole occult aspect of the Beatles, we do see many pictures going back to the very beginning where we see one-eyed symbolism, we see Masonic handshakes and that type of thing there. So I'll start with you, Melinda. What do you think about the whole premise that all four Beatles were Masons?
Well, like I mentioned before, Quarrymen is kind of a dead giveaway that something is going on there right from the get-go. Now, whether or not in a studio taking pictures, they go, okay, guys, now I want you to do this, whether or not that was a active, conscious decision on the Beatles to do some of the things that they were doing, or the photographers told them to pose like this, or we're going to put this in the background. I don't know, but the cult is all over, even from the very first, with the split lighting.
Yeah, with the Beatles or Meet the Beatles. Yeah, and Please Please Me, their first album, was released in the UK on March 22nd, which is 322, which is the number of Skull and Bones, right?
Yeah.
And another interesting thing I want to point out is in the United States, they released an album called Beatles 65. 6 plus 5 is 11. 11's a master number in numerology and Freemasonry, but the Beatles are all holding umbrellas, and umbrellas are another symbol of a mind control program. And another one that I want to touch on, because I keep hearing people say this, and I found an audio track that proves it's not true. When the Beatles did the Butcher album cover with the baby parts and the meat and the smocks, people who don't want to buy into the whole occult aspect of the Beatles will say that they did that reluctantly. They were told to do that. They didn't know what they were doing and all that stuff. but I have an audio of John Lennon when he was asked about the Butcher cover, and John says, I'm paraphrasing here, that he thought it was a hoot, that it was something different, and and then when the cover was rejected in the United States and they had to go to the trunk cover, that it was a disappointment. So I was listening to the interview, and it certainly sounds like that at least John had no problem with the Butcher album cover. And what I'll do is put that clip, that interview, into the show, and the audience can take a listen for themselves.
Well, there's one other perspective, too, is that they were trying to warn everybody. This is what I've heard. They were trying to warn everybody about the things that are going on in the music.
Yeah, I've heard that explanation as well, Melinda, and to me, it's just another form of denial. I'm going to play the clip that I just mentioned of Lennon in an interview talking about the Butcher cover and the fact that he was not at all adverse to doing that photo shoot and releasing that album cover. So I think for people who want to say that they were trying to wake people up and all that stuff, I don't know. I tend to think it's wishful thinking and people holding on to a version of the Beatles that they want to hold on to. They just don't want to go down a path where, perhaps the Beatles and the machinery behind them had that occulted aspect or darker side to it that a lot of people don't want to talk about or know about. So let's play that clip now, and let's take a listen to what John says about the Butcher cover.
I was mentioning to you off the air that the Yesterday and Today album, I always take the cover and I try and peel back
to look for the dead babies. Yeah.
How did that happen? That album cover that never saw the light of day, or if it did, got pulled off very quickly?
It went out. We took the pictures in London at one of those photo sessions. By then, we were really sort of, beginning to hate it. A photo session was a big ordeal, and you had to try and look normal, and you didn't feel it. And the photographer was a bit of a surrealist, and he brought along all these babies and pieces of meat and doctor's coats, so we really got into it, and that's how we felt. Yeah. So we I especially pushed for it to be an album cover, just to break the image,
Mm-hmm.
And it got out in America, and they printed it. About 60,000 got out, and then there was some kind of fuss, as usual. And they were all sent back in or withdrawn, and they stuck that awful-looking picture which you have in front of you of us sitting, looking just as deadbeat, but supposed to be happy-go-lucky foursome.
You look very unhappy.
Yeah, right. So we tried to, do something different.
Album covers were much simpler then, right? Just
you just walk in, take your photo, and walk out. Mm-hmm. Especially in America, because we made only, say, 10 albums, actually. In America, there seemed to be 30 of them.
So that's the interview that John did back in 1974 on WNEW out of New York, 102.7. I remember it well. And so I'll let the audience decide for themselves whether the Beatles were adverse to doing the Butcher cover. And so let's switch gears a little bit, ladies, and let's talk about the numbers and the numerology in Memoirs. Billy, of course, talks about the sixes and he talks about the nines. And before I read Memoirs, I was familiar with numerology, but it wasn't until after I read the Red Book that I decided to jump in and to read and learn more about numerology. And so the question I'm going to have, and I'll ask Wendy first, is, Wendy, when you first read Memoirs and the numbers were presented to us, was it something that you understood right off the bat, or was it somewhat baffling?
It was baffling because up until Memoirs, I hadn't done a lot of research at all on numerology, but the more I read Memoirs and the more I researched other than Memoirs, it did make sense. And, I mean, Billy sort of perpetuates the nines all the time for Paul as Paul, but he doesn't use the sixes very much. So perhaps if we could find some more information using the sixes, we'd find out some more about Billy.
Yes, he uses the nines whenever he's playing his Paul character. That's how I've kind of netted this thing out. He's 9 when he's Paul. He's 6 when he's Billy. They are releasing the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road. And I put this up on Facebook the other day. The release date is 9/27, September 27th. 27, 2 plus 7 is 9. So we have 9 again. And this is what he does. Victoria, with the numbers? I know in our show that we did with Sharon Tate, you had said that you thought it was nonsense at one point, but then you started to see the patterns, and then you had to switch gears a little bit.
Yeah, I was watching an old episode of Route 66 the other day and went to walk into a house, and the house number was 911. And I was like, this has been going on forever, because that was the early 60s. The 9s and the 6s, and they're all over the place. You don't have to make things fit by going back in time and looking at their release dates and whatever. It's very clear that there are some numbers that they are partial to.
Yep. Yeah. Melinda, how about yourself? Did the numbers, were you on board initially, or did you have to look more into it?
Yeah, you read that, and it springboards you into looking into everything else. Really interesting little experiment I did last night, thinking about the 9/11 and written in Roman numerals. I took Billy's birth date of September the 9th and wrote it in Roman numerals. And it's really interesting. It looks like it spells docs. The definition of docs, I looked that up, and it says to publicly identify or publish private information about a person. I thought, well, that
doxing, yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, the numbers thing, really, he explains so much, and especially with the occult aspect, is that he's trying to explain to you that this is pretty much how the world works.
Yep, and I say to folks all the time, Melinda, that the controllers, they paint by the numbers.
Yes.
And again, this is another one of those things, right? If you're reading it in the book and you don't accept that, I can't tell you how many times people have written me or wrote comments on my Paul is Dead YouTube channel and say, oh, the numbers are just ridiculous. It's nonsense. You can get a number out of anything. If you play around with the numbers long enough, you'll get the result you're looking for. And so those people, when they read Memoirs, are going to reject the numerology right out of hand, and it becomes a fictional aspect of the book, right?
Yep.
So, all right. So now we're talking about the numbers and talking about the occult. And, of course, Billy has a chapter in the book called Masonic Checkmate, which was extremely informative, and he explains what I refer to as the pyramid of power and the different degrees and how many degrees there are. There were 66 in total. And then what was even more interesting in the Blue Book, Tom has a footnote where he tells us that Billy is the Illuminati. So, Wendy, what do you think about that? What do you think about the chapter that talks about Freemasonry, the 66 degrees, and then Tom telling us, and he had to get Bill's permission to do this, that he is the Illuminati?
Yeah, exactly. I found that chapter fascinating. And, as Tom said, as he calls him, William is the Illuminati, and some Wings and Beatles songs were written by the Illuminati, and the Illuminati writer was William. And that's what he says in chapter 65. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And I think Billy is just trying to bring us into the inner sanctum as much as he is able to, showing us why and how this affects the industry and the world we live in. And he's trying to give us a balanced account, I think, on, what happens. And you notice how high up he is when in the company of other acquaintances that will probably be on a lower degree. They almost worship him. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's Barack Obama, and Barack Obama is in absolute awe of Billy in some ceremony in the US.
He had Billy at the White House. Yeah.
Yeah, and no, it's absolutely fascinating. It's a chapter I keep reading and rereading and trying to get more information out of it, because it is very important and it's very interesting.
Victoria, how about yourself? Masonic Checkmate and Billy being the Illuminati. What were your thoughts?
Well, I was disappointed that he didn't dox the rest of them, because I want to know who they all are. but yeah, I mean, his friends and who he hangs out. I mean, look at him when he's around the Queen. He's happy. He's smiling. He's in his element, obviously. I mean, even when he's on some of the talk shows, I'm not saying he's not polite, but it's obvious to me he would rather be somewhere else doing something else. But I was a little surprised of the disclosure of him being in the Illuminati. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We're talking about the talk shows, Victoria. I know exactly what you're saying. He comes across many times very cavalier with the host.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. And I'm not trying to say anything negative about him. Actually, I grew a little soft spot after reading the Blue Book for him. I quit calling him Fall and started calling him William.
Yeah.
Because he is. But I was a little surprised. I think that all goes back to the whole age of Aquarius. And now that we're in the age of Aquarius, which I'm unclear when that started, but apparently we're there, this is supposed to be an awakening and enlightening, and we're all supposed to know more things than we did before, and that may be his way of saying it, of disclosing something that people didn't know. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago. I thought that was baloney that about the Illuminati. I'd never even seen it before I watched Jesse Ventura one night. I didn't even know it existed.
And Melinda, what were your thoughts about that chapter and Billy being in the Illuminati? Tom telling us that that's where he sits.
Well, it makes you wonder, whether Crowley was Illuminati, and that whether or not the way people treat Paul is because he's the child of Crowley. You worship one, you worship the sun, type of stuff. I watched his concert he put out like 2005, and they keep zooming in on all these actors that were out in the audience, and it is a definite worship of him. He is obviously considered very high up.
Yeah, he is very high up the ladder. And just so the folks know, and I've mentioned this on a couple of shows, I'll just say it real quick. Billy tells us that the pyramid has 66 degrees. The first 33 degrees are the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Then is the 13 degrees of the Illuminati, where Billy sits. And then above those 13 degrees are 20 degrees of people or beings that we will never know. So these are truly people in the shadows or beings that are in the shadows. So that's the 66, 33, 13, and 20. And you add those numbers up and you get 66. Now let's talk a little bit about, in the book, Billy has another revelation via a footnote that Tom put together, that Billy was tutored by Aleister Crowley up until the age of 10 and was in a trauma-based mind control as early as the age of 3. Now, when I read that, I was very surprised. I was shocked. What were your thoughts about that? And we'll start, Wendy, I'll start with you again. That part of the book, tutored by Crowley in a trauma-based mind control program since the age of 3. Or I think they said that was his earliest childhood memory. What did you think when you read that?
I found it quite distressing, actually. I mean, obviously, Crowley was a major influence on Billy, taught him to read backwards and everything else, but the actual prenatal tormenting, abandonment and excessive control, ritual abuse, it's hard to believe, but it's also believable. And the very people that Billy is a part of, the Illuminati, are who supposedly did all this. And, it's hard to think that somebody would be happy to be in the Illuminati while the Illuminati did that to them when they were a child and before birth.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, because people have asked me about that, and I said, if you were raised a certain way, that's your world, and you don't really know any better. In the book, it says that not all of the trauma-based mind control was negative. There was a lot of positive experiences too. And in the book, it says that the reason why they did it was because they had Billy slotted. He was groomed and tapped very early on to have a very powerful position in the world. And they did it so that he would maintain his success, that he would stay on his game, that he would stay focused, that failure was not an option. So what do you think, Victoria? When you read that, were you surprised by it, or what was your take?
It made more sense, actually, because William had, no control over his childhood. And even when he advanced into the Beatles and was in control of everything, he still had not a lot of control. He didn't have all of the control. He may have had some creative control, but he wasn't in control. He was still being handled, and he's still probably being handled by someone, but he is in a system, and that's what he knows, and that's what he is. Basically, I always took the idea that we were talking about Crowley and him being potentially his son, and we know that Crowley had one in 1937, and Crowley's letters state that he instructed the OTO to ensure his care and education after he died. And we know that Bill had, it's obvious he had an education. He was educated. He was, it says on page 107 that he used many names for himself. I don't think that William was even his birth name. I think that's a name that came along later that maybe he liked or is after someone or something like that. And that this person who identified him as a musical prodigy at age 3, I think she probably, in a sense, rescued him, although he probably would have been okay if he was Crowley's son. I think that going the music route was probably a lot easier on him. And we all know who is a music teacher in this whole story and worked with everyone, right?
You're talking about Jane Ash's mom?
Yeah, I think I think that's who he was talking about.
Yeah.
I think that it was his mom. She taught at a exclusive Guildhall School of Music. Lily James went there. She's a blue blood. That all fits, at least in my mind it does, but that's all unfortunate. But in that world of the elites and even their own children, that's how that works.
Yep, that's how it works, and that's what they know. So, Melinda, how about yourself? When you read that, what did you think?
I read it and went, well, of course. Why didn't I think of that before? Because they all do it, right? So why it never occurred to me before that was probably done to him. I mean, look at the way he walks. I mean, you mentioned 2.5 hours on stage and
right.
Still raring to go. When I saw him in concert 5 or 6 years ago, he obviously had a cold. I was watching when the lights would go out and you could just barely see him. He was sitting at the piano and he was blowing his nose in between songs. He obviously was sick, and he was still up there performing.
Yeah.
I mean, even the way he walks, his posture. I mentioned that the other day. Is man, he's in really good shape for a almost 82-year-old guy. His shoulders are back, and I mean, it looks like he's known nothing but discipline all of his life.
That's right. I agree with that.
Which makes you wonder, what happened to his kids? Have they endured the same thing?
Yeah. Now, what about the piece about Crowley? I think Crowley is mentioned 33 times in the blue cover of Memoirs. So there we have 33. Master number, 33 degrees of Freemasonry, and so on. There's been a lot of debate and discussion, maybe that's a better word, about Crowley's relationship to Billy. Father, uncle, just a bloodline relationship. I'll go to Victoria on this first. I'll just switch it up a little bit here. Victoria, what do you believe is Crowley's relationship to Billy? And let me start maybe this way. Were you even surprised to read so much about Crowley in the Blue Book? And then we could talk about what do you think the relationship is.
No, I wasn't surprised to find it in the Blue Book because I had kind of figured that out somewhere after reading the Red Book and doing research and more research and more research. And even when you put their pictures together, they have the same earlobes. They have the same, there's a lot of facial features that are similar. I had found that old picture of Crowley with a young boy, and it's really hard to see because it's such an old picture, but he even seems to have a prominent toe in the picture. His leg is kind of forward, and you can see a toe that's extended.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't surprised to find that, but I was surprised he said it maybe a little. But he doesn't have the same view of Crowley that we do. No, he doesn't see him. We see him as the most evil man ever or something. He doesn't see him that way.
No, not at all.
So I was glad to read it, though. I mean, because I was starting to think I was crazy for thinking it.
Yeah, in fact, the footnote on page 326 of the Blue Book has my URL in there. And I'll say this, I had no idea that was going to be in the book. No idea. And via Tom, Billy focused in on a particular show that I did with Nick Shylock, and it was Nick who had said that, well, Nick's interpretation of what Billy's feelings were toward Crowley was that he didn't like Crowley, that he hated Crowley, I think is what Nick said. And so evidently the word came down to Tom that you need to correct that because Billy does not hate Crowley. That was very interesting when that came down. In that footnote, anybody who has the blue book, read it, the bottom of page 326, and you can see that Billy's making it very clear, and he's saying what Victoria is saying, that he has actually a fond view of Crowley. He certainly is not coming down on Aleister Crowley, not by any stretch. So, Wendy, what were your thoughts when you read about the whole Crowley piece in the blue book where it was really expanded upon?
Well, it's another subject I found fascinating, and when I sort of read that Crowley is mentioned 33 times in the text, I just thought 3 plus 3 is 6, Billy. So that's, it's little things like that that I tend to pick up on. I would say there's a bold-headed photo of Crowley where we see everywhere, where it's completely full-faced, and his son James and Crowley look almost identical. And, but then again, the photograph could have been manipulated or changed. But there is a very big resemblance between Crowley and James McCartney. I'm still flip-flopping about it. One minute I think he is, and the next minute I think he's just a close relative. So I'm not completely sure on that at the moment. Possibly, yes, his father, but I wouldn't say 100% sure about it.
Okay. And Melinda, what are your thoughts about the Crowley piece of it?
Yeah, I think that's his dad. Obviously, could be wrong about that, but just in the way what I mentioned before is the entertainment industry is all about Crowley. I mean, and if they're all about Crowley, they're obviously going to be all about the son. To me, it seems to connect the dots. And when you were talking about Nick, and when I listened to that interview, I thought that can't possibly be true. I never got the impression that he despises Crowley. I've worked a lot with abused people, and the one thing that I have learned is the people that abuse them so many times until they get therapy and figure it out and stop that cycle, they bend over backwards trying to please the person that's abused them, that caused them trauma.
Well, I'm going to read two things here, and ladies, listen, take a listen here. And I got this from another researcher that periodically sends me emails. And SJ, thank you so much for sending this along. He picked up significant differences between the book and the audio version of the book. So the actual hardcover or the softcover and the audio version, which was narrated by Gregory Martin. So here are the examples that SJ gave me, and I would like for you to comment on it. And when we do, we'll start with Wendy. Chapter 62, Run Devil Run Through the Driving Rain. The book says, I especially enjoyed working with my son. The audio says, I especially enjoyed working with my son, Askan, A-S-K-A-N. So I was unaware because I haven't listened to the audio book yet. I started it, but I haven't gotten very far into it. And so I didn't know about these discrepancies. So there's something there that we could take a look at a later date. But here's another one that I found very interesting. Chapter 64, Don't Let Your Inaction Blow It. The book says, learning of my relative's role made it unbearable. And they're talking about 9/11. The audiobook says, learning of my nephew's role made it unbearable. So SJ goes on to say, here he is presumably talking about George W. Bush being his nephew, if we assume both Billy and Barbara Bush to be the illegitimate children of Aleister Crowley, implicating him directly in 9/11. Isn't that very interesting? That we actually have differences between the written book and the audio book, which is, I'm looking at this as more of Billy giving us more clues. What are your thoughts about that, Wendy?
Yeah, that was very telling, I thought. I mean, it makes you wonder how many more discrepancies there are between the audio and the book. But if you take it at face value and you do think it's George Bush he's talking about, then obviously Crowley is his father. And that's all you can really take from it, and until you try and prove otherwise. And as that's in the audiobook, why would he put it there unless it was true?
So, Victoria, this discrepancy in the between the audiobook and the text, what do you think about that? Is it a mistake, or do you think it's another clue?
It's not a mistake. If it were a mistake, it would be edited.
Yeah. All right. And Melinda, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it's just more and more disclosure as time goes on. If 9 years from now there's another book, it's going to be even that much more disclosure, although I don't think Bill's going to make it that long, but you never know. You know, and the whole thing with the 9/11 thing just fits in right in with the occult. You know, even to the point that his nephew was reading a book about a goat to the kids when the whole thing was going down.
My pet goat.
Yeah, the whole 9/11 thing, and you know, thank God you had Richard Balducci on, because he really explains so much of that.
And Richard will be back.
Good.
There's a chapter in Memoirs that talks about Paulism. And I had to actually read the chapter a number of times for me to start to really understand what was going on there, what was Billy telling us. So what I wanted to do was just to get your impressions of what you believe he was telling us that Paulism was or is. So, Wendy, I'll start with you. When he talks about Paulism in the book, what do you think he's actually referring to?
I think he's talking about how he channels Paul and how being Paul affects him. But I also get the feeling it's like an agenda-based form of Beatle Satanism. It's trying to overthrow certain belief systems that we all have. And I think, in a way, the word or the name Paulism is a sort of soft option name for what it is, which is Satanism. That's my take on it.
Okay, that's also, of course, you've seen the video I put out, and that's pretty much my take on it. It is a form of Luciferianism / Satanism that was put in play to overturn the traditional morals, traditional way of living, lifestyle at the time, right before the Beatles had hit the scene. So in the book, it says in 1962, in a footnote that Tom has in there, that the Illuminati declared war on Christianity in 1962. So I'm in agreement with you. I believe Paulism was one of those initiatives that was put into play to overturn the old guard and to roll in the new guard, right? And I'm not saying, again, I always have to say this because I get these comments. People will write, are you a Satanist? Are you Luciferian? No, I'm just explaining what is being discussed in the book and trying to interpret what it is that they're telling us. And that's what I got out of it.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Victoria, how about yourself? Paulism, what was your takeaway?
I took it that it was idolism, idolatrism, whatever the proper word there is, and that it was almost like a new strain of like there was a religion where they cut out a sliver and made a new religion. I think that in the music industry that you see little crumbs ode to Paulism here and there in videos. You know, you'll see, like, I watched one the other day and it had a moped up in a tree and a barber seat and some broken records. And I was like, that's Paulism. You see it in the movie The Thing You Do. The bass player has no name. It's kind of a Paulism. So that's how I interpreted it.
Okay. And Melinda, how about yourself?
Well, yeah, I definitely, interpreted it as some form of channeling, being raised Catholic and being married to a Russian Orthodox for quite a few years. I understand they get their saints and somehow the saint attaches themselves to it. So there is some kind of spiritual validity to it. Now, whether or not it's good, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, let's move to something that was also very controversial in the book. I recently did a presentation on it, and it caused a little bit of a ruckus, I would say, in certain corners of the Paul is Dead research community, and that has to do with Billy's claim that he played a version of Stanshall and also played a version of Phil Ackrell. And I'll start with Melinda on this. What were your thoughts before the presentation, and what were your thoughts after the Stanshall presentation? Did it change your mind, or did you think all along, yeah, I think he played a version of Vivian Stanshall and Phil Ackrell?
Oh, I think right from, I mean, you confirmed it with your video, but he says it right there in the book. Look at my son.
Right.
He looks exactly like Vivian Stanshall, and he's right. I made a comment the other day, is like, Bill, I see in your face James McCartney, I see Vivian Stanshall, I see bits of Phil Ackrell. I don't see Paul McCartney anymore. Everything is kind of reverting back to before all the surgeries and stuff, you know, and really, basically, by saying that, I'm seeing who he really is.
Yeah.
Instead of the facade.
Victoria, your thoughts. When you first read about the Stanshall piece in the book, was it something that you bought into, or was it not until later that you gave it more consideration, and where do you stand with it today?
I think it finally explained when I'm 64. He has a liking towards some vaudeville and some other ragtime types of music, which that's fine. And I just think Stanshall was a hobby for him to release. He could go back to other types of music and have some fun. And I think he's a workaholic, and it was another form of work, but yet it wasn't work. It was fun a little bit. So it just explained a lot to me where some of that music came from.
Wendy?
100%. In fact, I couldn't, if somebody was to try to convince me that he didn't, I just couldn't believe it. To me, he created the character of Vivian Stanshall, and it's amazing to me when you see Street Viv and Billy in various videos and interviews, how people cannot see that it's two different people. I mean, you know, body language, their stance, hands, everything. I mean, it's a very clever character, and it's obvious. You can't unsee it. Once you watch the videos, you can't not see that it's Billy, even underneath.
Yeah, he played a version, and the problem is that, and I know, Wendy, you and I have talked about this in the past, where the problem with the Vivian Stanshall piece is when claims are made that there was one Vivian Stanshall. And when we take a look at it, we could see that there are two different people playing Vivian Stanshall. I also want to say that when I did this piece of work on Stanshall and Ackrell, I wasn't going out there to try to upset somebody's cart. And I'm talking about Street Viv's family. All I was doing was taking what Billy had put in the book, as I mentioned much earlier in this discussion, and using it as a foundation to understand, is this true or not? Because when I first read the Red Book, and I read about the Stanshall piece, I didn't even know who Vivian Stanshall was, because here in the U.S., nobody knew who he was. And so I had to learn who Vivian Stanshall was to start, and then I had to rummage through the different pictures and the videos and the music and all that stuff to kind of parse it and figure out which end was up.
And also, I mean, you would understand this more than I do, but the way he holds instruments are exactly the same when he plays. And those things I don't think you can really fake. You can fake your hair, you can wear the latex, the costumes, whatever, but actually physically holding an instrument to play it properly, you're going to hold it the same, whether you're Billy or Viv. And that's something I noticed when I sat and watched a lot of videos of him, especially Urban Spaceman, and then I watched some Billy videos, and they hold instruments and the way they compose themselves the same. You can't really fake that.
Yeah, Billy's posture is very upright. He has very good posture. And what I noticed was, not that Street Viv doesn't have good posture, but Billy has very good posture.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I noticed right off the bat, that they stand differently, they move differently. In any case, so it sounds like everybody here is sold on the fact that the Stanshall claim in the book is truthful.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so we touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but we'll expand on it here. In the book, Billy wants us to get to know him a little better. And after reading Memoirs, how do you feel about that? You feel like you want to know him any better? Is he somebody that you can go out and get a drink with and shoot the breeze with, or would you just rather keep him at arm's distance? Melinda, I'll start with you.
Well, on a human level, just one soul to another, that would probably be a very enjoyable conversation. He does mention that he feels so isolated that all he has to do is start having a conversation with somebody, and he can tell that their pulse is racing and their eyes are full of excitement and stuff, and he can't ever have actual human conversation, one person to another, because they're so enamored with who he is that he can't get past that. To have a conversation with him, from my perspective, he would just be just another person, you know. I'm just not really into idol worship that much anyway. So yeah, I would love to have a conversation with him just to know who he is.
Yeah, get a better feel for him in person.
Yeah. Not with me, you know, oh my God, that type of stuff, but just having a conversation from one soul to another.
Right. Victoria, how about yourself? Do you have any interest after reading the book, if you had the opportunity to meet him, to get to know him a little better?
Yeah, I'd like to meet him, and I wish that it could be real, where I addressed him as William and talk about, maybe his music from '66 on, and have a conversation. I mean, I didn't feel that way after reading the Red Book, but I most certainly did after reading the Blue Book and reading about Linda and emotions and different things. I mean, he is a human being, and he's a human being I wouldn't mind knowing a little bit, although that Illuminati thing's a little weird, but yeah, I would love to have a conversation with him and get to know him a little better.
Wendy?
I like him. In fact, I think I like him more now than I did before I knew who he was. That doesn't make sense. But I like his compassion for animals and vegetarianism and climate and all those type of things. But I just wonder, I get the feeling he's extremely adept in compartmentalizing his life, and he's self-assured, which possibly could come off as arrogance at times. But I just wonder whether the mind control and the ritual abuse could have infiltrated his personality in some way. So, when he's being Paul and he's out there and people say, oh, God, he's a bit arrogant, or he's everything, it's to do with the mind control and not his natural, innate personality. I'd like to know one way or the other.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's a good point, actually. Now, we know that the Paul is Dead community is fractured. There's not unity, believe it or not. There are those that are out there, and there are many people that think this way. They believe that Billy should be arrested and he should go on trial and he should pay for whatever it is they believe that Billy has done. My position on this has been that that type of outcome is never going to happen because of the way the world works, and Billy is firmly embedded inside the pyramid. As we mentioned earlier, he is in the Illuminati, and so that scenario that some people are chasing is just never going to happen. It's wheel spinning. So I'm going to ask each one of you where you think this is going for Billy. How do you think that it's all going to end for him? In other words, how are they going to treat Billy on the way out? Wendy, I'll start with you. What do you think happens with Billy once the curtain closes? Does he go to jail, or is there a ticker tape parade for him?
Ticker tape. I really do think that. I think up until that time, I think we'll get continued disclosure up to his passing. And I really do think when he does pass, the controllers, I think, will just turn his passing into hero worship and adulation, and perhaps the adulation that he didn't have in life that Billy will achieve in death. And I do think it will be a ticker tape parade. I don't think anything will happen. I think his family will probably be well versed in what will happen, how to answer various questions when he's gone. But I think he'll be made into a hero for doing what he did for the Pyramid of Power and for the music industry. I
agree. Melinda, what is your take? What do you think is going to happen once he closes in on departing this world?
I think I read something recently about that giant wheel in London that they were talking about naming that after him. It looks like a giant eye. 90% of the people still think that Oswald killed Kennedy. They're not going to, really, seriously, they're not going to do anything to him. Anybody who thinks that he's going to get his punishment is just, they're living a pipe dream, really. I mean, we can't even figure out about exonerating Oswald, much less this. And just like Wendy said, when the truth finally comes out, they will treat him like he's a saint for what he did, not that it was a bad thing. I mean, the whole concept of, stopping little girls from killing themselves and all that kind of stuff, that's probably going to be brought up again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's going to get statues in his favor and all that kind of stuff. I mean, because really the elites are controlling the whole thing anyway.
Right.
So anybody who thinks that they can, that they're going to do anything other than that, they just don't understand how the world works.
I made the remark that they would probably erect a statue of him at Buckingham Palace at 66 feet tall.
Nice numbers there.
Victoria, what are your thoughts about Billy leaving, and how do you think it's going to be handled by the controllers?
I think he is working on his bucket list right now. I think he'll have his own obelisk roundabout there in
Yeah.
London somewhere. I think that, I don't mean this in the bad way, but that kid in high school that was always so special, and they always got special treatments because their parents were special, and it kind of feels like that. It kind of feels like, they're going to make sure that for what he's done. When I say what he's done, it really isn't about the music. It was about the change to society.
Right.
It's what he wanted, the New World Order. He's brung it. It's what they wanted, and they're going to say job well done. And, he'll have statues and music schools and whatever else named after him. I don't have a lot of faith that there's going to be a lot more disclosure, although I know in the book he said it would be disclosed. I don't think that there's going to be a lot because they just don't want to have to fight all these people who don't believe it. I think they've done a lot of the disclosing now, and we're going to get some more nuggets, and that's going to be the end of it. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, Tom tells us full disclosure won't happen until after he passes away. So, that'll be interesting when that happens, and I have no idea how they're going to roll that out. We'll have to wait and see. He did tell me that there is a major piece of work underway. I believe it to be a documentary, but it's expected to be released once he passes. So we'll have to, like I said, wait and see how this rolls out. And by the way, I also want to mention that we're here talking about what he's done on behalf of the Pyramid of Power, what he's done for the New World Order and the agenda and all that stuff. For the listening audience, we're not saying that we agree with what's being rolled out. What we're doing here is we're giving you the perspective of how they would treat his departure based upon what he's done for them. And I want to make that very clear because, like I said, a lot of times they get these crazy comments and emails and people misconstrue the point that I'm making, or in this case, that we're making. I have two more questions. I know this has been a long one, so just bear with me. If you had the opportunity to ask Billy one question, now Vince Russo asked me this. It was a great question that Vince asked me. What would you ask him? So if you had the opportunity to ask Billy one question, what would you ask him? And we'll start with Melinda.
I would probably ask him, was it worth it? The pressure that he put on his own children, living his life a lie all this time. I mean, he mentions a lot of times that possessions don't really mean that much to him. Is that fiction part of it? I don't know. He loved his little, he talks about being born a young country boy.
Yeah.
That's really who he's all about. He missed his face. I remember that part really hit home because if there's one thing that you connect with, it's your face that sets you apart from anybody else. And so he was staring at a stranger in the mirror every time he looked in the mirror. Was it worth it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Victoria, what would you ask Billy if you had one question to ask him?
Well, originally, I would have said, was it worth it? But since we've already been there, I'm going to say, Is Aleister Crowley really your dad?
Yeah, get it from the horse's mouth, right?
Right.
Wendy, what would you ask?
I'd ask him, or comment, you seem to have a grudge against Paul. Why is that? When I started to write down the questions I had for him, they came to 51, so I had to whittle it down.
Which is 6.
Oh, yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, that's what I'd ask him. Why do you seem to have a grudge against Paul? Because he does seem to like knocking his voice and his appearance. I think in Memoirs he says his voice was throaty and raspy and his voice sort of worn out and things like that. I don't think it's necessary really to sort of say things like that, and I'd like to know why he does have a grudge.
Yeah, it almost comes across like the classic case of knocking somebody else down in order to pick yourself up.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe I'm not making excuses for him, but maybe that has something to do with the mind control program that he was in,
Yeah.
where he has to constantly reinforce to himself that he is the best and he's better. I don't know. Great question, though. Great question. Okay, so here's the last question, I promise. Now, we know that not everybody has read the memoirs of Billy Shears, and we know that there are people within the Paul is Dead community that have not read it, but they still want to comment on it, I might add. So let me ask this question. Is it possible to research Paul is Dead without reading this book, or is the book a must? And so, Wendy, I'll start with you.
No, I think it is a must, because it's obvious that, Billy is behind this book, and, it gives a basis on which to go and research other things. But I don't think you can really call yourself a researcher if you broadcast and write books if you don't read it. I mean, just to debunk or discredit, you really need to read everything that's out there, because the other books that have been out there for the Beatles, they've only really contained the narrative which would have come from the Pyramid of Power. I mean, this is from an authentic resource, so why wouldn't you want to read it if you're a genuine researcher?
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Melinda, what are your thoughts?
I concur exactly what she said, is that if you're, and I'm using the quote here, going down every rabbit hole to investigate this case, why would you balk at this book? If you want to prove that it's not true, why wouldn't you read it? I read another researcher's book at the same time I read this Memoirs for the second time, just to see how well they line up. There's obviously some differences, but I don't understand how anybody would not want to read it to have covered every basis that they could.
Yeah, even if you didn't agree with it, let's just say, right, you would want to understand,
Right.
The components in the book, and because you are definitely going to get something out of it, right? Okay, so again, fair enough. And Victoria, what are your thoughts? If you're really doing Paul is Dead research and you really want to get to the bottom of the story or the conspiracy, can you go without reading this book?
It's a must read. The internet's a great tool, but there's a lot of pollution out there. I think the book is as important as the Sgt. Pepper album cover is in PID. I really think it's that important.
Great. All right. Well, I mean, that's my take on it, too. And as I have mentioned in my shows, read everybody's book, because you're going to get something out of it. And if there's stuff that doesn't resonate with you, then leave it on the table. If there's stuff that does resonate with you, then take it with you and put it in your toolbox and use it as you pursue your research. All right, so we have reached the end of our show here, except I'm going to go around the table one more time and ask each of you if you have anything else you'd like to say that perhaps I didn't cover here in the outline. And we'll start with you, Melinda.
Okay, there was one paragraph that really hit me deeply more than anything else in the book, and it made me very empathetic to Bill. I think of Bill as another tragic player in this whole mess. To quote Memoirs on page 211, I had to give myself reason to justify deeply hidden levels of self-betrayal. I had to eventually deal with my self-loathing that made me willing to drop my own identity, give up who I was in order to be someone else. For some dead guy I didn't even know, I had to win at all costs.
Yeah, that's pretty honest. Victoria, anything that you want to talk to us about or close with here that I didn't cover?
Page 371 of the Blue Book points out that if Paul died in a car accident, it would not be considered an accident in Satanic code. Well, I've always thought that Paul wasn't the one in the car. It was one of the doubles, but I think he was killed some other way. And the car crash was just a story. On page 157, it even says that Paul's father and stepmother did not positively identify his remains, and his dental records were of no help due to the injuries. So we never really knew that that was Paul in the car crash.
Yeah, there are people in the Paul is dead research community that do question the car crash narrative. The clues certainly point to a car crash, but who really knows? But related to that, there are people that believe that biological Paul McCartney was swapped out, but that he didn't die. So what's your view on that, Victoria? And we'll go around the table and ask Wendy and Melinda as well. Is biological Paul dead, or is he still walking around alive and well?
He did indeed die back in 1966, and probably on September 11th. He did die. I think some of these other people that you see out there, again, might be some of the doubles that are still floating around that they have to do, have to have them on a payroll or something. They have to take care of them somehow so that they don't talk, especially as they get older. But I do think that he did pass away. And the genuine grief that you see in John and George, that's not fake. That's real.
Yeah, like at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that speech that George gave, right?
Yeah, my guitar gently weeps.
Yeah.
And just John going off the rails. I mean, he melted down there. He kept going because he had to, but he was a mess. And I think that's why he lost his two best friends in life.
Melinda, going back to you for 1 second, and we'll end with Wendy. The question about whether biological Paul could possibly still be alive, or whether you believe he actually died back in '66. What's your take on that?
Oh, yeah, he died. How can you hide him all this time?
Yeah.
The date is pretty consistent with so many very unusual and tragic things that have happened on September 11th. I just don't see how they could possibly hide him all this time. It's easier, dead men tell no tales. It's easier to get away with this. And, the part where he talks about that, somebody in the band is going to die when the deals are made.
Well, you're on a point, Melinda, that I've made a couple of times on a number of shows. It's just a whole lot easier for Tavistock to manage this entire psychological operation if biological Paul McCartney is not in the picture, meaning that he's deceased, he's dead. These deep state factions, they're looking for the road of least resistance, So we're on the same page, Melinda. Wendy, how about you? Is biological Paul dead, or is it possible that he could still be alive?
I believe he died. It would be wonderful to think he's out there somewhere sunning himself in the Bahamas or something like that. But I think, as you say, he's collateral damage and he's gone, I think. And that's what I think. He definitely died, I think, in the car. I think there's too much emphasis on that, and it's a nasty thing to happen. So why would you describe it if it didn't happen? You could do so many other things in the narrative than talk about a car crash and how he lost his hair and he's decapitated or whatever. It's too nasty to not be true, if that makes sense. You could describe it in so many other ways.
The other thing that makes this virtually impossible to solve, it's a lot like the Kennedy assassination. It's 53 years ago, over half a century. And think about anything that somebody has tried to resurrect or dig up from decades ago. It's not going to happen.
No.
It's just not going to happen. Anyway, so I want to thank you ladies for coming on the show and talking about this. It was a fabulous discussion. I want to thank each one of you for all of your help over the last 3 years. for your support, for your insights, your feedback, and everything else that you've helped me with as I've been on this journey. This is the first of 3 final presentations or interviews that I'm going to do, and I'm going to wrap up the ongoing research. So this was a great way to kick that off. I do believe that we collectively have done a very nice job of pulling together a lot of the pieces of the puzzle to this conspiracy, and I know that it has made a lot of sense to a lot of people. And I know this because of the feedback that I received from the emails, the PMs, the comments, and so on. So there's definitely an awareness and an awakening, I believe, of people that are really starting to suspect that Paul McCartney did indeed pass away back in '66.
Yes, definitely. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. So, you open my eyes to all this and many other subjects. But I have noticed in the past year, many more people are questioning, putting comments, far more than before. So I think people are really waking up. They may not have the full picture, they may only have part of the puzzle, but they are definitely questioning much more, I've noticed.
No, that's good. That's a good thing.
Mike, I want to thank you for not just for this subject, but for taking me so far ahead in the truth movement and opening my eyes to so many things. God is definitely blessing you with incredible wisdom, and I just can't express how grateful I am.
Thank you, Melinda.
To any PID people out there who want to keep it going, my advice to them, look at the Lewis Carroll connection. I think that's never really been talked a lot about, and I think there's a lot there. Anyway, thank you. You made a difference in our lives, in a lot of people's lives.
Amen.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, you guys are too kind, gals. I always say guys. I'm so sorry. Gals are very kind. And what I'll do is I'm going to have the show out. I'm going to have it uploaded by September 11th. Somebody actually wrote me a comment and said, why are you using an occulted date? And I said, that's the day that Paul McCartney died. I'm like, oh, my God. So anyway, we're going to put it up on September 11th. Share it and see if we can wake some more people up. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And I'll catch up with you on Facebook. And again, I'll have the show out within the next few days.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Right, bye.
Bye-bye. And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the description box below. And as always, I would like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can find all my social media and web links by visiting my hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to check out my music and album releases. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone with the next show. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.